Jarett Berke, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Jarett, you bought a restaurant. Gasp. You had even told intermediaries during your search, no restaurants. And
That's
yet,
right.
Here you sit. So let's get right into it. Jarett, how about some background on you first, please?
Yeah, sure. And if you look closely at my shirt, you may see like little specks of pancake mix and stuff like that. Because I was at it this morning. Not usually like that, but it's been quite the morning with a little snowstorm here and some employees that couldn't make it to work, and running a small business.
And for those who are not watching the video, you are. Yeah. What, in the back room or the downstairs room of the restaurant?
Yeah, we got a little office in the basement. Certainly not very glamorous in here, but I'm going to put my money into the kitchen, the dining room, not into my office. So that's just how it is. Yeah.
Nobody's expecting glamour. These are small businesses, Jarett.
Exactly.
So we're good on that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So my background: grew up in New Rochelle, New York, just outside New York City. I guess pretty typical kind of middle class upbringing. Played hockey and lacrosse and went to public school and graduated from New Rochelle High School. And growing up, I would say I was pretty well exposed to entrepreneurship. My grandfather emigrated to the U.S. from Poland in the 1930s to escape the Holocaust, essentially, and did. And much of my extended family unfortunately perished in the Holocaust. But he grew up with a single mom and three siblings, and really, again, had this kind of a tough go at it growing up in the New York area as immigrants. And so he started when he was young, when he was still, a teenager, working with his uncle and selling garments out of the back of a car, or the trunk of a car. Joined the Army, and my other grandfather joined the Navy, so they fought in World War II. And then on my dad's side, when he came back, he started a business in the garment industry in New York. So pretty typical for like, Eastern European Jews in the New York area. And so he built this pretty great manufacturing business. They actually did women's undergarments off-brand, so like a Walmart brand, Walmart, Kmart, things like that, and put whatever label was required on it. And my dad worked for him. One of my uncles worked for him. My second uncle, I also have an aunt, was in the restaurant industry. So he opened and ran several bars and restaurants in New York City. My father was one of his partners and one of his investors. And so again, I was kind of exposed to entrepreneurship from a young age. Again, in and around the New York City area, saw what restaurants were all about, and was fairly put off by it. I don't want to put it down too much, but it's hard work, right? Restaurants are tough, and many of the restaurants that my uncle opened and my dad was a part of failed and closed. Some of them were great and are still in operation today. But it's a tough business. It really is. Yeah. There's a lot that open and close. I don't think it's too much different from many other startups. I think that's a bit of a misnomer that restaurants are, have a higher failure rate than other startups. Most startups fail in the first 5 years, about 90% of them, right? And restaurants are probably right in that same.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. It's like restaurants are very visible, right? You feel it. You go to that restaurant, you sit there. It's like part of your community. And so when it closes, it feels like terrible. But the reality is that most startups fail, and
interesting.
Restaurants
I'd never heard that said. That's a really interesting point. Probably also restaurants get a bad rep because they are so hard. They're hard. I mean, all business is hard, particularly small business, but restaurants seem like hard business on hard mode.
Definitely. Yeah. Hard to scale. Not a whole lot of growth in most businesses, in most restaurants. And they are tough. Growing up, at some point in my high school years, I became somewhat enamored with the service academies. So, Annapolis, the Naval Academy, West Point, Colorado Springs Air Force. So I went to Annapolis. I distinctly remember walking up the stairs of Alumni Hall on induction day and kind of looking, turning back, waving to my parents and having this oh crap moment where I'm like, what am I getting myself into? So graduated in 2004 with an aviation contract and a commission in the Marine Corps, and did about 6 months of kind of basic officer training, and then flight school. And so, the thing that I was always attracted to as I was going through flight school and everything else was really the leadership aspect. And so the way the Marine Corps works in aviation is, you do this time in the fleet, and then you do something else, and then you go back, usually as like a major, and then you go do something else, and then you go back as like a lieutenant colonel. So I was a captain now, did my first tour. It's time for me to go do something else. I kind of felt like I was really on the fence, to be honest. And I felt like I'd peaked in a way, like they call it the Iron Captain, right? I was really on the fence about going and doing something else and coming back as a major and being a staff officer. And,
and being a staff officer means kind of desk ridden.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a lot more political, writing orders and, working for some, general or colonel or something. Again, and kind of doing these like really functional things, right? Being the operations person again, and not getting to fly and do a lot of that stuff that I really enjoyed doing. Certainly a lot of leadership potential, but different, right? It was not as much, hanging out with the Marines. It was a lot more kind of higher level leadership. And I didn't know if I wanted to do that, right? So I was on the fence for a while, and then ended up kind of making the decision that I was going to go do something else. Not sure what I wanted to do. I took a job as in the acquisitions workforce. So these are the people that kind of buy and sell and do the lifecycle management of aircraft and systems and things like that. And decided I was going to put in my resignation, go to business school. So I did that. Went up to Tuck, to Dartmouth. That was, an awesome experience. I'd asked a friend who had gone through Tuck and was also, he was in my company at the Naval Academy. So he'd kind of been through all this. I'm like, hey, what can I read? How can I get ahead? And he recommended this book, The 10-Day MBA. And I remember reading it, and I'm like, okay, revenue is like money that comes in, and then profit is like what you get after. Like I literally, I could have told you all the pieces to a Russian surface air missile, but like the difference between profit and revenue, I was like, lost on me. So it was very much an intro into business. Fortunately, I stayed in the Marine Corps long enough that I was eligible for the full GI Bill. And then Dartmouth does this thing called the Yellow Ribbon, and they max it out. So I went to Dartmouth for free. So I have never paid a dime for like any of my education. And that also helped me in terms of, this saving money for an acquisition of a business too, because I was able to squirrel some money away through this whole thing. And, I wasn't in a bunch of debt when I graduated. Through the course of my time in the Marine Corps, bought a house. My dad passed away. And so he left me a little bit, not a lot of money, just a little bit to, again, kind of down payment on a house roughly in North Carolina, which isn't very much. And that gave me a head start in terms of my ability to go out and acquire a business. I ended up doing an internship at New Balance, which, great company, really cool. They're Boston based, they're small for an apparel company. They do, I think, maybe 4 or 5 billion now. But, competing against Nike but still making a great product and great culture. So I did an internship there. And while I was there, I realized that I didn't want to work in a big business, right? I remember coming into work one morning, and I'm like working on this PowerPoint for some data analytics project that I'm working on. And it was a cool project, and it was, really interesting. But I just had this realization, like, I don't want to make PowerPoints for some other person to make a decision on. I want to lead. I really want to be in charge again. And I missed that, right? I missed having that leadership, being in charge. In our pre-call, I talked about this book by Daniel Pink called Drive. And I read that at some point, and Daniel Pink talks about 3 things for fulfillment. He talks about autonomy, which is, making decisions, being able to make those decisions, not report to, somebody and have them do it, right? You have the autonomy to make decisions. He talks about mastery, which is knowing your craft, becoming a master in your craft, knowing everything or having a path to becoming a pro. And then he talks about purpose. So autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And purpose is not necessarily, working for a nonprofit or the military or something like that. It's whatever purpose is for you. What makes you want to go to work in the morning? What makes you tick and makes you get out of bed when you don't feel like it and it's rainy and cold and snowy outside. And for me, I just realized that going to work at a big company, going to be a consultant or a banker, I was not going to have any of those things. I was not going to have autonomy. I was not going to have mastery, and I wasn't going to have purpose. And so coming back into my second year at Tuck, I said, I want to lead a company. And this was kind of before or early search fund, right? Search fund, like I had never even heard of it up to that point. I didn't even hear about it until probably halfway through my second year when somebody mentioned it to me and said, hey, there's this thing called a search fund. You should look into it. But I kind of set on this path going into my second year of like, I'm going to find a business to buy and I'm going to buy it. And I don't know how I'm going to do it.
Totally your own idea. You later, a few months later, you heard about that there was a search fund thing, but that didn't plant the seed. This was your own seed.
Totally, yeah. And the only other thing that I would say had an impact was I had a buddy who was a year ahead of me at Tuck. I played hockey with his wife at Tuck, and he bought a company while he was at Tuck. It was the guy's name is Jay Bourne. He bought this company called Lock and Lube, and Lock and Lube sold grease couplings. So it was like literally the thing on the tractor that like attaches your grease gun to the bearing. And it was like the best grease coupling out there. It was manufactured in South Africa. He bought this company that somehow ended up having the rights to sell these things. And he bought it from a farmer. And this farmer was like literally getting letters in the mail of other farmers like, hey, I saw this thing. Can you send me one? Here is a check for $30 or whatever. And this guy's like running this business off his kitchen table. My friend Jay goes in and like helps him kind of establish the business. And then he ends up buying the business from him. And so Jay had done this, right? Similar type of story, small business, I don't know what they did in revenue, but it wasn't much, maybe a couple 100,000 in revenue. And he was like building this company up. He created a website. It was like making an e-commerce presence, starting to sell on Amazon. And so he had kind of walked this path and I'm like, that's what I want to do. This is really cool. And so, yeah, I started searching. So I started looking at business brokers, quickly found it. So this is my second year, I knew I had to get a job. So I ended up like towards the end of my second year, I got a job at a local company. It was a software company. I was kind of running marketing and sales. I'd met the owner, the CEO through, he was a guest speaker in one of my classes, approached him afterwards and said, hey, I'm looking to stay in the area. Do you have any openings? And kind of explained my background. And he said, yeah, actually, my sales guy just left. Would you be willing to do marketing sales? I'm like, sure, I'll figure it out. So I went to work for him. It was actually kind of an acquisition target too, to be totally honest. It was a smaller company, about 19 people, a couple million in revenue. I'm like, maybe I could roll in here and take this over. I ended up deciding against that once I started working for the company, but I got a job and I did, I guess what now is called a self-funded search. Kept my eyes open, was talking to business brokers. I got kind of a lucky break when I was it was a Tuck event. Actually, it was like something on campus where a bunch of alumni just hanging out. And my friend Jay was there, who I mentioned that bought this grease coupling company. And we were talking to another friend who, about our age, this guy was an accountant. And I was saying like, yeah, I'm looking for businesses. I'd really like to buy something. And this friend that's an accountant says, are you talking to any accountants? And I'm like, talking to accountants? Like, I don't have any money. Like I do my own taxes. Why would I talk to an accountant? And he's like, no. Like accountants know what's going on. They like know every business. Like there's only really two kind of small, medium business accounting firms in our region here. You should talk to somebody at my firm. And I was like, man, that's freaking brilliant. So he set me up with a meeting with one of the partners, met with this guy named Mark, and gave my resume, said, hey, I'm looking for a small business in the area if possible. I'm willing to move, but I'd really like to stay around here. These are the criteria I'm looking for. It was like, I want something that's, a strong business, not a key man type of business, something that I could come into and take over. The business will keep on going, recurring revenue, good history, things like that. And he's like, oh yeah, I've heard this pitch before. So yeah, he comes back to me like, I don't know, a week or two later and says, hey, why don't you come down to my office? And I got a couple ideas and we'll sit down and talk. So went and met with him. He had like a couple businesses actually in mind. And he said, one of them was like a snow plowing business, pretty small, kind of key man. I was like, that's not really what I'm looking for. I can't remember. A lot of them were kind of small service businesses, but really small, a couple 100,000 in revenue. And I explained, hey, listen, I need something a little bigger. And he's like, okay, well, I know you said no restaurants, but there's one that I want you to take a look at. And so he's like, I'm not going to tell you the name. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but here's a P&L, and I'm going to tell you that they don't serve alcohol and they close at 3 p.m. every day. And I'm like, okay. The two worst things about restaurants is booze and nights, right? Being there, missing all of your kids' everything because you go to work in the afternoon and you get home at 1 a.m. And so you're sleeping when they go to school, and then you're at work when they come home. And so I'm like, all right, like this is kind of interesting.
And the booze, why is that a bad thing?
It's a pain in the butt, man. It's
just the trouble that booze causes generally.
Yeah, well, I shouldn't say categorically booze is bad in restaurants, because actually we're starting to do mimosas and things like that here. But bar type of restaurants, especially some of the ones that my uncle ran, it just brings a ton of headaches. People drinking too much, or your servers, your bartenders over serving, which can come back to you. It's a huge liability. People get into fights, people fall down the stairs, people people do stupid things when they're drunk. And when it's in your business, that's bad. Tons of great money, great margins on alcohol. And there's certainly a reason why a lot of people do it, but it's one of the harder things I think about running a business is just dealing with that, employees taking stuff. And so tough part of it.
And I was going to, to your other point, I was going to say that I thought that's where all the profit was in restaurants.
It is a very profitable side of the business. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's true. So I'm losing that. But again, the downsides of it, I think, outweigh the money.
Yeah.
So,
cool.
Yeah. So,
okay.
So look at this P&L, revenue is like super solid, right? Goes up 2 or 3% every year. Profitability, really good, like super profitable for a restaurant, especially like a breakfast and lunch place. Typically, if you look at a restaurant P&L, they all kind of look very similar, right? So for every dollar that comes in, about 30 cents is paying for the food, about 30 cents is paying for the people, about 30 cents is paying for everything else, insurance, occupancy, repairs and maintenance, things like that. And then 10% is left for profit, right? And that's like very standard.
Okay.
Poorly performing restaurants, you're going to be closer to 0% or maybe -% in terms of profit. Really good restaurants, you're going to be in the high teens, maybe even the low 20s in terms of profitability. And it's all about being able to move those levers, right? Where are you saving money? Do you have, pizza is a great business in terms of food costs, right? Pizza is dough. People make their own dough. It's super cheap. Cheese is expensive. That's the expensive thing on a piece of pizza, or pepperoni. But usually in a pizza business, your food cost is like 20%, right? Low 20s. Finer dining, you're going to have a much higher food cost and a lower labor cost. So again, dancing around this 30-30-30 is pretty typical. The thing that really stood out to me here was they were all in the kind of mid to high 20s. So food cost was in the mid to high 20s, labor cost was in the mid to high 20s, and fixed cost was also in the mid high 20s. So this business was kicking off, 17, 19% profit margin year over year over year. And when I asked about the owners, what they did, because I didn't want this to be something where the owners are like slaving every day. I'd found out that, one of the owners had an illness a couple of years back and was kind of still recovering from this and really wasn't involved in the business at all. It was a husband and wife, obviously. The other owner was an engineer by training, but loved baking. And he spent most of his time in the bakery, and he literally just baked, like he was just a baker. And, he obviously oversaw everything, but the business had a general manager. It had an office manager that did all the, back office stuff, pastry chef in the bakery that was running the bakery. And so this business was just kind of going, and it was still really profitable.
Aren't bakeries also really difficult businesses? I mean, yes, the typical restaurant where you have to have a night owl lifestyle. Yeah. Bakeries have in the opposite direction. You're up at 1 or 2 a.m. or whatever. or at least the person in the bakery doing the baking is?
Yeah, it kind of depends. So wholesale bakery, very slim margins, right? Wholesale bakeries work on volume. So, they're only making a couple percent in margin, but they're pushing a ton of product, right? The nighttime piece is definitely a factor. We do more sweets. So the only thing that we do that requires that nighttime stuff is we make donuts, and we want those donuts to be fresh in the morning. So we have somebody that comes in, usually he comes in at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and then he works till about 1 in the morning. But we don't have anybody there between about 1 a.m. and about 5, 6 a.m. So, okay. Yeah. And again, because of those hours, because we start at, 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, most of our employees come in around that time. We tend to attract like adults, like more people that are more mature.
Yeah.
A lot of restaurants, you have people who really like that night lifestyle, right? They come into work at 5 o'clock, they work, they make a bunch of money, everyone goes to the bar, they party. And then, they're kind of up all night and that's a different lifestyle. Most of our people like the fact that they leave at 3 p.m., right? Because they have kids and they get to be home, and all the same reasons why I like this business were things that are attractive to our employees. And it's a real benefit for us and a, competitive advantage when it comes to employment, because we're able to attract people who are a little more mature and appreciate that kind of lifestyle.
Yeah. And what was tell us, I know there's more to say about this business, I believe, like the history, the location. Tell us more about, all of these surprise features that actually started to paint a really rosy picture of business you'd want to own.
Sure. Yeah. So right off the bat, I said, after I saw this P&L, I said, hey, I'd really like to meet the owners. I met the owners at this office, the accountant's office, and immediately felt comfortable, right? The gentleman totally reminded me of one of my uncles who lived right next door to me growing up. They just had the same mannerisms and immediately trustworthy. I remember we were planning on an hour meeting. We ended up staying there for like 2.5 hours, just talking about all kinds of stuff. And the woman, the wife, she like when we got done, she gave me a big hug, and like it was just like it like felt really good. So immediately I trusted them, because I didn't feel like they were trying to put a big valuation on this business and like hide things. They just seem like great people. Raised kids in the community, were part of the community, and that felt great. The business itself, when I bought it, it was 73 years old. So it was opened in 1947 by a former Marine, a guy named Lou Brissett, who fought in World War II. Valiantly, was decorated, came back to Hanover, and with a little bit of startup capital that he borrowed, he was able to open up this breakfast place right on Main Street in Hanover. And he ran it for 37 years. He was a key person in the community. He helped start this improvement society that kind of helps with a lot of stuff downtown. He helped start a bank, which is right next door, which happens to be our bank, which happens to be the SBA lender that lent me the money to take over this business. And it's just one of these places that if you go to Dartmouth or if you've been to Hanover, like it's just where people go. We do most of our stuff from scratch, right? It's not like right off the Cisco truck and into the fryer. Like we make a lot of our stuff from scratch. There's some stuff we bring in, but like the vast majority of it we do here. Great food. The bakery is awesome. People rave about our cakes and pies and things like that. Again, all that stuff is scratch made. And so it's just
called Lou's for the founder.
Lou's. Yeah, it's called Lou's. Yep.
And so anybody who's passed through Hanover, or certainly anybody who's been to Dartmouth, but maybe who's spent any time in Hanover, probably will have come across it, heard about it, maybe even eaten there. So it's kind of the main street. What's the name of the main drag in Hanover?
Main Street.
Main Street. Okay. Yep. So it's kind of an anchor on Main Street, a neighborhood institution.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And then in terms of some of the nuts and bolts, one of the things that makes this a really strong business is the restaurant only accounts for about 60% of our total revenue. So it's 60% restaurant, about 30% bakery, and about 10% catering. And those numbers shift throughout the year and year to year. But that's one of the things that makes this place really successful. Is if we were only a restaurant, only doing 60% of the revenue that we do, it would be significantly less profitable, right? Because my fixed costs are fixed; they would stay the same, and they would eat up a greater percentage of our profitability. But the fact that we have these kind of add-on businesses that are really successful and stable makes it really interesting and makes it really fun, and again, a much better business than your typical restaurant.
So, other than the food costs, which are variable,
yep,
that the other costs of doing business that go into the catering and into the bakery would be there anyway.
Right. Exactly.
So you're just basically getting more productivity out of these assets.
Exactly.
By having those two lines of business.
Yep. Great. Yep. Precisely.
I wonder why more restaurants haven't keyed into that possibility.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it takes a lot, right? That's the thing is like this stuff didn't just happen, right? I take credit for none of it, right? I bought this business. It had evolved over decades and decades to be what it is today. And again, I just stumbled upon it and I got super lucky. But, my goal from the start was just keep on doing what it's doing, right? Growth is not an objective here. Sure, I'd love to grow.
We're going to get to that because I want to spend a minute on that. But another feature of the profitability of the business, another way of capturing that, measuring that was revenue per square foot. You've talked about margins and how it compares to margins in the restaurant industry, basically double the average or almost double the average. Right. Talk to us about revenue per square foot. What is that metric all about?
So another metric that a lot of actually in retail, that's used a lot more than in restaurants, but restaurants too. I couldn't tell you what the number is. I could probably do the math on it, but again, just the fact that our fixed costs, and actually we did expand. When I bought the business, the bakery was in the kitchen. The kitchen was super tight. It was incredibly tight. You were always bumping into people. We had stuff stored in every possible place you could store it. I was lucky. About a year ago, one of the tenants next door moved out. It's a basement space. Not a great space for anything other than essentially manufacturing. I took over that space, got it really, really cheap. I was able to move the bakery down there. So now my revenue per square foot isn't as great as when I took it over, but it's really cheap space. So it works out really well. But yeah, I mean, again, to the previous point of the fact that it's more than a restaurant, we've got these other lines of business. That's the thing that makes it a great little business.
Great. Yeah. So once you basically looked at this kind of objectively, you said, this is a great business. I'm not going to think I'm going to put aside my anti-restaurant bias and just look at kind of analyze this objectively as a business. And this is a great business.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You were about to tell us about the plan or the kind of thesis, as in maybe growth is not the plan. How did you now tell us kind of what the approach was?
Sure. So again, when I looked at the business, it was pretty clear that growth was, sure, I can grow catering. I really wasn't interested, and I'm not interested in opening other locations. I think they would do fine, but I just don't think I would get anywhere near the profitability, the level of profitability that I have here in terms of percentage of revenue and things like that. And plus, opening up multiple locations is a bit of a death zone for restaurants. Like you see this a lot. That space between 1 and I'll say 10, there's a lot of small chains that don't make it, right? Because now you're not quite big enough to have this full management team and the scale. So you as the owner are all over the place. You're running yourself ragged. And the reality is a lot of times, you open up that third, maybe fourth restaurant, it doesn't do well. It can bring down the whole enterprise. And again, you see this a lot in restaurants, and I just didn't want to have anything to do with it. I still don't. I think this is a great spot. People love it. I don't want to screw it up. And so, growing it, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to dump a bunch of money into a new location. I'm just going to let this thing cash flow, pay off my debt. Well, I guess we'll get to the debt and stuff here in a little bit, but pay off all my loans and just let this thing roll. There certainly are opportunities in catering, right? Catering is one of those businesses that you can grow. It's not going to take a lot of investment, really no increase in fixed costs or anything like that. And we are trying to grow that, but it's slow and it's one of those things that I don't have to do. There's not a lot of pressure on me to do that. It's just something that I would love to take more of a share of the pie of. And the bakery side, we're looking at doing some stuff in retail, being able to sell some of our mixes and things like that in grocery stores and stuff like that. But again, this is something I'm not in a huge rush to do. It's something that I would like to do eventually.
Great. And now let's circle back to what we talked about, your military experience, of your experiences going from, what was it, squadron to squadron, where you're the new guy, but also their leader, and having the humility, but also commanding respect, that needle that all searchers and all business buyers need to thread. What did you, perhaps you could frame this in terms of, what did your day one speech look like?
Yeah. So I didn't make a day one speech. They introduced me. They said, "Hey, this is a new owner." And I said, "Hey, I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to work with you guys. I look forward to working with you hand in hand." But I felt like it was not appropriate for me to get up there and give my philosophy on anything, because I was new to the business. I was new to the industry. I didn't want to be that guy. And I've seen that in changes of command, where the new commander gets up and gives his whole philosophy. And it's like, shut up, dude. like this is not your time. Put your head down, learn, be observant, be a sponge, and learn the place first. And then you can talk about what your philosophy is going to be, but you gotta figure it out first. And,
but Jarrett, let me just interject though. And maybe speeches, sounds too lofty, but some sort of introduction, like, hi, I'm Jarrett. This is my background. No, I mean, that probably, we probably don't want to do that, right?
Right. The previous owners did that for me. They introduced me. They told everybody who I was. They stayed in the business, right? When we did the deal, they had a contract to stay on for 3 months with an option to stay on for an additional 3, so 6 months, and they were going to continue running the business. Additionally, we went a full day with me as the owner of the business before anybody knew about it. So we transacted on, I think it was on a Saturday night. Sunday went, and it was great. It was a good day. Everything was normal. I came in the afternoon, and it was like, hey, the owners gave a speech and said, this is Jarrett, and we've gotten to know him, and they gave my background, and they actually the owner, Toby, he actually made this big cruller, like a big donut, fried it. It was like massive, and painted it gold. And he had this passing of the golden cruller to me. It was pretty cool.
So there was some ceremony then.
Yeah, there was, but
tongue in cheek ceremony.
yes, for sure.
And Jarrett, the business was, what did you say, 73 years old, 1947 it was founded. Yep. These owners were related to the original Lou, or they bought the business themselves?
They bought the business themselves. They had owned it for 27 years. So I was the fourth. I am the fourth owner. They were the third. So 37 for Lou, 10 for a guy named Bob Watson, who was kind of in the middle there, and then 27 for Toby and Patty.
Always nice too that a business can demonstrate its ability to transition. Granted, they'd held it for so long that whatever was true of the business when they bought it 27 years prior probably wasn't true when you bought it, but still
exactly
shows a little bit of robustness there. It suggests robustness. Go ahead.
Yeah. So then I said, hey, I'm really excited to be here. And I'm looking forward to learning from you guys. Didn't make a big speech, showed up the next morning at 6 a.m. and bust tables.
Really?
Yeah. So I spent the first month, I was here every single day for the first month, and I did every job. So I started bussing. I did that for a couple of days, and then I went into the dish pit and I did dishes for a couple of days, and I went into prep and I did prep. I baked at night. I did everything, and I just got to know all the people, and I got to, and basically, when I approached them and said, hey, listen, I just want to learn from you. I just want to see how you do this. And tell me everything. And so that's how I spent my first month was, I'm not going to change anything. I'm just here to learn the business, and spend a ton of time with the owners, listening to stories and getting the background and all that kind of stuff. But, really worked myself into the business slowly from the bottom up. And I felt like that was the best way for me to come in and show the people that, I wasn't going to come in and change the menu on day one, or, open us up for dinner or do anything like that. I was like, I just want to learn about the business. I'm not going to change anything. Tell me about you. Tell me about your family. Tell me about your job. Why do you that's awesome. Why'd you do it that way? I never would have thought of that. And, everything I could just to make sure that the people in the business understood that I was humble and wanted to learn. And I wanted to be a part of this thing, this organism that was, that existed. And I wasn't there to, come in and make a bunch of changes. And so, it was, I would say it was like a slow transition where, I kind of took over the business, and, with the old owners still in the business, that was sometimes a little tricky, but I didn't, I never like took offense to that, when people would go to the old owner and ask questions, and I just, again, tried to be as humble as I could.
Took some time. Takes time for people to direct their energy toward you and see you as the boss.
Totally. Yeah. But really,
Jarrett, there were GMs, right? Or a GM. I think that's an important thing that I skipped over.
Yeah.
When looking at any business really, but particularly a restaurant, if you're actually going to consider buying a restaurant, you say that this is really important.
It is
probably self-evident, but give us more
as to
why.
So, in terms of scale, this business is kind of special because it's big enough that we are able to afford to have a GM. A lot of restaurants are not. So we have a GM, same person, a gentleman named Craig, who's awesome. He's great. He's been in the industry his whole life. He was actually a regional manager for one of the big chains, a ton of experience. And his kids live here, and he wanted something that was a little kind of slower pace than the real corporate stuff. And so he came in as the GM about 2 years before I took over. And, it was pretty clear with the previous owners and with me that, he's here to stay, and he likes it here, and he's not looking to do something else. And so that gave me a lot of confidence that he was here, for the long term. I'm pretty sure right off the bat, I gave him a bump in pay, and, we talked right away about compensation and some sort of a bonus plan and things like that, not to push him, but just to make sure that, he knew that he was really valued and that I needed him to stick around. I still do. I think in order for me to be able to do the things I do on a daily basis and just live the life I want to live, I need a person like that in this business. Otherwise, I would just drive myself nuts. I'd be here all the time. So it was really important for me to have him stick around. The chef too, the kitchen manager. I made sure he knew that I was never going to come in and take over his role or try and push him out or anything like that. He was an experienced guy. He was really creative. He ran a tight ship in the kitchen, and made him understand that I appreciated him and his experience and his knowledge. And I was gonna really looking forward to working with him. Mm-hmm. And really, it was kind of this slow buildup over the course of the first, I'll say 18 months, where, I was more and more involved. I had more knowledge. That mastery was building and building to where I could make decisions. And then, I bought this business in the summer of 2018. And if you recall, in the winter of 19 and 20, we had a major event that really affected restaurants. So COVID happened about a year and a half after I took over. And, I like to say, and I really do feel this way, the business never felt like it was mine until COVID. I kind of felt like an imposter the entire time. Even though I'm looking at the books and I'm writing the checks and signing them and everything, and people call me boss, I just never felt like I was the boss. I always felt like I was the new guy. And I always, again, had that kind of imposter syndrome. And then COVID happened, and I really had to step up and lead, in a contingency. And fortunately, I'd had some experience doing this type of stuff. Obviously, never in a pandemic, but flying aircraft, crisis response is is what you get paid for when it comes to being a pilot, right? When everything works, it's great, but then when things start going wrong, that's why you make good money, and that's what you get trained for. And you spend a lot of time dealing with. And I really felt comfortable when COVID happened, as strange as that sounds. But, there's all this pressure to holy crap, we are in this unknown territory. I got to figure out a lot of stuff. I have 50 people on my staff, not all full-time. Full-time equivalents were probably in the 30 range. But all these people rely on this business for their livelihood. Labor's tough up here. It is in a lot of places in the U.S., but in the Upper Valley where I live in Hanover, it's really hard for a number of reasons, but it's tough to find good employees. And so I was worried about that too. Like if I close, if I lay people off, am I ever going to get people back? And so, I made a promise to the crew that I was going to do everything I can to keep everyone employed full time and, keep the business going. And we're going to be agile, and you got to roll with it and stick with me because we're going to try some stuff, but we're going to do everything we can to keep this business going. And that's exactly what we did. We didn't close. We never closed for a day.
Wow.
Our servers
you didn't close.
Never
even
closed.
Right in the month after it hit the fan.
Yeah. So fortunately, the one major change I did make in those first 18 months is we changed our point of sale. So we had this really legacy point of sale. This is where people put their orders in and where you swipe your credit card. Yeah. We changed our point of sale to a more modern point of sale called Toast. And I love Toast.
I see it everywhere.
Yeah, you see it everywhere.
You posted about Toast on LinkedIn recently.
Yeah. So I was on their customer advisory board for a while. I actually know a bunch of people at the company. So, when I was making this decision, obviously I was looking at all the options, but I had a really good feeling about this company. Best move I could have made, because we went from no online ordering, really legacy system with a server, big ass server in the basement, to this cloud-based system, online ordering, all this other stuff. Well, when COVID happened, doors closed. I went to my servers. I said, "Hey guys, I need you to become delivery drivers. This is the only way we can do this." And they were like, "All right, cool, we'll do it." And so all my servers became delivery drivers, and we started doing delivery on day one. And we didn't do delivery in the past. I hate the third-party delivery companies, Grubhub and Uber, and that's a whole nother story. But they're kind of predatory, especially towards small business, small independent restaurants like mine. So we started doing delivery, and we started doing family style meals because people were stuck in their house. We're like, hey, why don't we make dinners for a family of 5 with salad and a dessert? We're known for our desserts, and package it up and make this really easy process for them to pick it up and not have to cook. And we were just like super entrepreneurial. And I say that, but I don't know. Nothing was.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. I mean, we were just doing what we had to, right? We were like figuring out ways to make money, and we did it. And it was just a slow rise back up. Revenue fell off. On average, we're doing $8,000-$10,000 a day in revenue. It went to like 1,000, and then we have this 21-day trailing average chart that we keep an eye on. And it was like, it just kept going up and up and up slowly over time. And, until we built the business back up, we did outdoor dining as soon as the weather got nice. And, again, that was kind of a turning point for me in terms of being the boss, because at that point, I'm like making these decisions and bringing back all these entrepreneurship classes that I took at Tuck and figuring out ways to, get the team on board and come up with minimum viable products, and use the lean canvas for coming up with different ideas. And we did that. I sat with my managers and said, all right, we broke out the lean canvas, and we're filling out all the boxes for the dinners to go and for just different things that we did. And it worked out. So really lucky.
I haven't heard that phrase, lean canvas, since my tech days. Sorry. You were saying?
I was just going to say, of course, we leaned on every stimulus, anything out there too. The bank was awesome, super supportive. We were the first PPP loan that they wrote, and potentially one of the first PPP loans that went out in the US. They were right on top of it. As soon as it opened up, they were there. And I worked really closely with the bank to get that PPP loan. So, and of course that was forgiven, and there was other stimulus packages that we were able to take advantage of, employee retention credits. I was all over that stuff, and they were lifelines. They truly were.
But Jarrett, revenue did decline markedly, and then you clawed your way back with this innovation. But when revenue declined, and yet you kept everybody employed, so did you kind of just personally absorb the lost profit there?
No, I mean we had a cushion, right? We don't run a super conservative balance sheet in terms of our cash cushion, but we had plenty to last us a couple weeks, right? We were going to be able to make payroll for a couple weeks, and again, our fixed costs went down. I went to the bank and said, "Hey, I'd like to stop making my payments on my SBA loan because that'll help me a lot, and on my mortgage and all the other stuff, because at that point I owned the building." And the bank was great. And they said, sure, we'll just pause payments. So I was able to take away some of those kind of recurring payments that end up, building up and being really scary. Again, a big part of our business was cost of goods. And so we trimmed labor a little bit where we could. The people that kind of use this as a part-time gig, and students and things like that. Like, sorry guys, we just don't have the hours for you. But we didn't lay off any full-time people or anything like that, and we just kind of trimmed as much as we could. And I said, hey, when we get to this point, that's when we have to start laying people off or whatever. And fortunately, we never got to that point, right? We were able to just like create new lines of business. Again, that PPP loan coming in really timely was super important, and we just were able to just kind of keep on trucking through. So it worked out well.
Well, I think your experience of only feeling like truly the owner on the other side of this experience, while many business buyers aren't going to go through a pandemic in the business that they just bought a year and a half earlier.
Let's hope not.
The kind of only once the business has their fingerprints on it do they feel truly like the owner, as opposed to just owner in name.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of is a natural way, kind of progression that you experienced, so just more accelerated. You probably would have eventually gotten there, but after 6 months you got there because COVID kind of forced you to really make some strategic decisions that affected everybody within the organization.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the way you managed that, Jarrett. Sounds like it was quite successful.
Thanks.
Let's get into a little bit about what the deal, actually, your transaction here actually looked like. And let's start with whatever you can share on the business, the numbers behind the business itself.
Yeah, sure. So, as I mentioned, I am still under an NDA, so I can't get into too many details, but I'm happy to kind of give some big picture numbers. So, right now we're doing, in terms of revenue, or when I bought the business, in the millions. So single digit millions, but somewhere in the middle there. In terms of profitability, again, high teens. So the owners had a good life, right? They were making in the hundreds of thousands, kind of mid hundreds of thousands in terms of SDE,
Mm-hmm.
and the way we valued the business was we did like an interest rate buildup method. So instead of there's no comps for this type of business, right? If you look at McDonald's or something, a publicly traded company, they're trading at like 9x earnings, and this is not like that. So we didn't really have.
Before you get into this, because I want to hear you break this down, Jarrett.
Yep.
But why? Sure, you want to compare apples to apples, so industry business to industry business, restaurant to restaurant. However, on the other hand, there is kind of a pretty tight band in small businesses or businesses of a certain size that is, call it 2.5 to 4.5. That's so why wouldn't you just anchor to kind of that, as opposed to this more sophisticated method you're about to explain?
To be honest, I don't have a good reason. The accountant this guy, Mark, who was kind of the intermediary for this whole deal, when he presented the business to me, this was the method that he used. And I took that to a couple friends that I have who had worked in investment banking and private equity and said, hey, does this make sense? And they said, yeah, absolutely. And they pointed to this book called Duff and Phelps, which is a valuation guide that a lot of kind of smaller business, PE type of firms use in order to come up with a value of the business. And Duff and Phelps had essentially a formula and then kind of a guide for what the values of these different parts of the formula was. So, the easy way to think about it is some multiple of earnings. The opposite way is, instead of multiplying, is through division, right? So you take SDE or NOI or whatever, EBITDA or whatever you want to call it, and you divide it by some number, some risk premium. And so, in real estate, this is what we do with a cap rate, right? Yeah. And so for a business, you can do the same thing. And so the way we did it was, I think there were 4 different components. There is a risk-free rate, plus an equity risk premium, plus a size premium, plus a industry premium. I can't remember. I don't think I said that. Industry, size, and then company. So 5 different parts of it. So you take the risk-free rate, which at the time was, we'll say 2.5%, 3%, whatever the 10-year treasury is. You take the equity risk premium. So if you look at the S&P 500 over the course of the last however many years, it's averaging, the average returns are, we'll say 7-8%. So you add that to your 3%. So now you're at 11. You have some kind of, industry premium. We'll call that 5 to 10%. You have a size premium, maybe that's another 2 or 3%. And then you have a
size, because it's a small business. It deserves.
Right? Yeah. So the
you
smaller,
need to take that into account.
Right. The smaller the business, the kind of more that percentage is going to be. And then a company risk premium that is kind of made up, right? And so, this is what you negotiate on. Like, what is that number? If that number is bigger, right? You're dividing by a bigger number, then you get a smaller number for what the value of the company is. If that total number is smaller, you get, you get a bigger number.
So right? This is almost like you'll sometimes hear people refer to the multiple that we buy businesses based upon, converting that to kind of a cap rate to think about things in real estate. That's basically what this you could just divide by 100 and flip it, sort of thing.
Yeah. So
how you broke this down, how you kind of add these 5 risk percentages up, you total them, is pretty interesting. So this is well known. So private equity experienced listeners will know what this is. I have never heard of this. I have some studying to do, I guess. This is a well-known method, I guess, among business brokers and bankers and valuation experts. Okay.
Yeah, and actually on my side, there was somebody at the bank who was kind of, in my corner. He had done a similar type of valuation. So, the sellers had their valuation, we had ours. Of course, their premium is like 17% or something, right? So it'd be like a 5x multiple, more than that, 5.5. And I come in and mine's like 30 something percent. So mine's like a 3x multiple. And then we said, okay, well, why'd you use that number for the industry risk premium? Well, because restaurants, blah blah blah, or this size. And again, Duff and Phelps has some kind of numbers for what those should be. So, if a business is less than $5 million, then you should use this number. And so we were like really on the micro side of this. And so a lot of this was really up for negotiation. We ended up in the vicinity of, 3.5, something like that, 3.7x multiple. So that number was, up into the 30s or high 20s, low 30s. And then there were a couple other levers that we had, right? So one was working with the bank and figuring out how much the bank is willing to lend. 2, it was the sellers and how much they were willing to take back, as a seller note, and then how we were going to treat that in terms of escrow or anything like that. So, and then the last is like how much money I had, which wasn't a lot, and I ended up like basically clearing out whatever investments I had. And then I went to some family and said, hey, I just need a little bit to get me over the line. And I was able to borrow, just again, a family type of loan in order to get me over the line there. And then
can you tell us what that sum cash was that you brought to this transaction?
It was 200 and something thousand total.
It was 200 and something thousand total.
Yeah.
And you'd basically liquidated all of your assets, your financial assets, and done a little bit of friends and family money.
Yeah.
And you're in your mid 30s with a family with 3 children and a wife.
Yep. Super risky.
It was super just making sure that because now it looks, things are going well, so it's like no big deal. But did it feel like you were going all in? Like you were pushing all your chips on the table?
It did, but also I'm like, what do I have to lose? Like I had this great education. It looked like a great business, and it turned out to be a great business. And if it didn't work out, then I'll go get a job, right? Like, I knew that I could get a job, and it would suck, and maybe I'd have to go crawl back to somebody and ask for money, a family member or something, and hey, can you help me out here? But it was super risky, and I realized that, and I knew it at the time, but this was what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be miserable in some job that I hated, and so I took the risk, and it worked out. So
well, I interrupted you about where did SBA debt arrive at? I think you were going to finish out the terms.
Yeah, SBA was almost 80%, just shy of 80%. The sellers were a couple $100,000 in terms of what they were able to lend me. That couple $100,000 acted as escrow. So basically, we had it was a stock deal too. This is another kind of interesting point, but we did a stock deal, and I can talk about that here in a minute. But we had this list of things that the escrow was going to kind of cover. So, one of them was working capital. So we had a net working capital number that we had to be at, and I think it was plus 50,000. And obviously, this list of things that are considered in working capital. So if that wasn't there, that was going to come out of this escrow and come out of this money that I was going to have to owe them. If anything broke, big things, if the freezer breaks, if we have some issue, that was going to come out of the escrow. And there were things when we looked at the building that were like, ugh, the freezer was super old. The dish area was like a mess. There was water leaking through the floor. So there were a couple of those items that I knew I might have to fix. And we had this money that was kind of this escrow that if any of those things came up within this time period, it was going to come out of that money that I owed to the sellers. What else did we have?
That's a great protection, by the way. I'm sure many of my guests have had that, but I'm not super so familiar with that technique that I ask about it. Does that have a name? I mean, that's kind of like a forgivable seller note, but it's more like money allocated should something very specific covered, I assume, in your APA, in your purchase agreement. Should one of these things occur, like some asset worth over $1,000 breaks, then this money goes toward that. Great technique.
Yeah. And that worked out really well. I can't remember who told me to do that, but somebody gave me that advice, and it was sage advice. Really, really good. The other thing is the real estate. So the sellers owned this. It's a condo association, this building. So they own the condo, and that was really, really important to me. Most restaurants are asset light, and that's one of the dangers, right? They don't own a lot of their stuff, so rent goes up every year, and they are never able to kind of get over the hump. Whatever profit margin you make in the beginning is going to be the margin you make forever. Well, they own the building, which is awesome, right? 30 South Main Street in Hanover, great piece of real estate. And that was really important to me. So we were able to kind of allocate value to different things. And basically, we kind of were going back and forth on what the value of the restaurant was. And finally I said, hey, listen, I will pay more for the real estate because I'm able to get cheaper debt for a longer term. And it's, secured, but I'll pay less for the restaurant because this is shorter debt, more expensive, more risky. And that was the ultimate agreement we came to. So I bought an option to purchase the real estate. I had a 3-year option at a fixed price. And then I had a right of first refusal that resorted to, we basically said we would have it appraised by 2 appraisers, and we would, mix the 2 together. And that's what I would pay for the building. So I was pretty lucky. And it happened to be right before COVID, which kind of sucked, but also worked out fine. But there was some really, really cheap debt that came from the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston that my bank found, Ledger Bank. And it was 0% interest for them.
Wow.
Because it was the Jobs for America Act. So as long as I was, employing people and had any kind of growth aspiration, which, of course I could say I have, lots of growth aspiration because I want to grow catering and grow bakery. They were able to give this money at 0% to the bank. They put their carry on it, which was like 2%, but I got super cheap debt, 25 years on the building. I had some money that I had been saving up to buy this building, but then I went to one of the community development loan funds in New Hampshire and said, hey, I'm looking to borrow an additional $100,000 as mezzanine debt. And they were able to do that. And so I was able to buy the building about 16 months after I bought the business, all SBA. So that's a SBA 504 because I own the business in the building. And then SBA 7A, 10-year term, 10-10 on the 7A to buy the business. And then what else? That's pretty much it.
Jarrett, why did you not buy the real estate when you bought the business? Why did you just buy the option?
I didn't have
just
the
do
money.
The option.
I didn't have the money for it. As I said, I cleared out my, basically cleared out my savings. So I was like, I just didn't have the cash.
Yep. But that just worked out phenomenally. Yeah. So, well, before I kind of close out what you're sitting on today, I just want to revisit the multiple that you ultimately paid, or excuse me, we can call it either the multiple, or we can call it the what was the language for the way you did it?
The
ultimate
risk premium.
Yeah, the ultimate risk premium. But you said the multiple was in the mid threes, which feels like what we often hear on this podcast. Yep. How does that compare to other small businesses that you're aware of? If we do kind of force ourselves to do a bit of an apples to apples, is that where a business of this size typically falls anyway?
I think for restaurants, you're going to find it's going to be much lower, especially smaller ones. So much, if I were to look at the pizza place down the street, like I would probably expect to pay in the vicinity of like 1 to 2.
So you paid a premium, but you also, you're buying a much more premium business.
Exactly. The profitability and the stability were the things that really stood out. And then the fact that there's kind of all these other pieces to it. It's this community asset, the real estate made it more valuable to me. And I don't know, maybe I overpaid. Sometimes I think I did, but you can't.
Things are going so well, and we're going to highlight exactly how and why here as we start to wrap up. Okay. But also, Jarrett, one thing I should have asked you at the outset is when learning about Lou's, what's the vibe? So as a diner, I come in, is it this kind of big bustling place, or is it, what's the vibe?
Small bustling.
Bustling place. Yeah. Diner? Is it a diner?
It's diner-ish. Lou was pretty specific that diners were like fast food and cheap. And so we're a restaurant, not a diner. But it has that 50s diner feel. It's got like the checkerboard on the floor and, on the walls, the booths, a counter with like the boomerang pattern on the counter. So that's very 70s. Oh, yeah. And bakery kind of counter in the front as well when you first walk in the door. But it's small. The booths are tight. It's packed most of the time, especially if you come here on the weekend. There's a line that goes down the wall for people waiting. We don't take reservations or anything. You just come and you wait. The great menu. We've got kind of a bigger menu, diner style, but a little bit more refined. We've got some stuff on there that's just not your typical diner fare. And it's a little, the menu I would say is cleaner too. Like, we have a lot more greens and a lot less fried food, and sure there's heavy stuff, and pancakes and things like that, but there's also some options that are lighter and cleaner and healthier. And, with the student population here, I think that's really appreciated. And we saw a ton.
Well, I was going to say, being in a college town for an Ivy League university, something tells me that there's a little bit of that that's needed on a menu.
Totally.
The stock deal. So what did you want to say about that?
Just that was a big conversation that I had with my attorney and with the sellers and a bunch of people. That was a touchy one. Super happy I did a stock deal though, and this is why. There's risk, right, when you do a stock deal, and as I mentioned, I did really trust the sellers, and I didn't get this feeling like there was going to be something that was going to get uncovered. They'd been cheating on their taxes or whatever. But when I took over the business, first of all, we agreed on this working capital number. So there was money in the checking account. Payroll was going to happen on schedule a week after I took over. We pay every 2 weeks. Everything was set. The terms I had with my vendors was set. Most of the time when you open a new restaurant, especially a new restaurant, it's cash on delivery. Like Cisco comes and they want a check. So I had 30-day terms with most of my vendors. Nothing changed. And I think a lot of this rigmarole, like I've only listened to a handful of your shows, but I've heard of some of the people who didn't do stock deals, who did asset deals and like lost these big contracts. And, it was really upsetting for them, for their business, not, emotionally, but like it upset the business because, their rent changed and all this other stuff. Well, none of that stuff happened. I remember I got a health inspection pretty soon after I took over, and the health inspector looked at me. He's like, "You're not Toby." And I'm like, "No, I'm not." But, I bought the business. It was a stock deal. So it's the same corporation. I looked into this. I did research and made sure that we didn't need another health inspection, new one from the state or whatever. And he's like, "That's not true." And I'm like, no, it's true. Trust me. Like I checked into this, and so did my attorney. And he's like, "No, you got to kick everybody out and shut the doors." And I'm like, "Listen, sir, respectfully, if you close my doors and kick everybody out and give me a bad name and you're wrong, I'm going to sue you. I'm going to sue the state for lost revenue and, damage to our reputation because I know I'm right." And he's like, "Hold on." So he goes, makes a couple phone calls, and he's like, "You're right." And so, the inspection went fine. I was, again, super respectful and learned a lot and all this other stuff. But The fact that
well handled, Jarrett. That was a
yeah, that was like
on razor's edge moment there.
I know it was scary, but yeah, super risky too, right? If I just said, okay, sure, like that would have been very damaging. But yeah, it ended up working out really well. And I took a hit on depreciation, right? There was goodwill that I can't depreciate because it's already fully depreciated. But you know, it worked out really well for the sellers because now they're paying long-term capital gains tax instead of short-term capital gains. So
which is why sellers typically want it.
Exactly. Right. So their tax rate on the deal, you know, if it was an asset sale, would have been into the 20-30% range. But as a stock deal, long-term capital gains, you know, much lower tax rate. And the price adjusted too. So we lowered the price a little bit because the sellers were getting the advantage. I was taking the risk. You know, I think there's a lot of people out there, especially attorneys, they'll tell you right off the bat, like, never do a stock deal.
Right.
And
exactly.
There's a lot of great reasons not to, but there's also a lot of reasons why it could work out. And again, I was lucky and I trusted the owners and it worked out really well for me. It could have gone different ways, but it was the right decision. I'm glad I made that decision.
Well, I feel like doing a stock deal is akin to buying a restaurant. The default is you don't do it. The default is the asset yes. purchase, but don't be so narrow-minded that you don't consider the alternative.
I love it.
If it looks like it could make sense, go for it. So, Jarrett, you mentioned that you basically were able to buy the real estate a year and a half later.
Mm-hmm.
You had been saving. You didn't have the capital to do that at the moment of when you bought the business, but a year and a half later you did. So that tells me that things were going well. It was earning nicely enough that you had the deposit necessary to buy the building. Correct me if I'm wrong, and you've told us about COVID, but give us a bigger picture now of like, how has it gone? How are things going today?
I would say really, really well. I think I've been super fortunate in a lot of ways. I found a great business. It's worked out the way I kind of expected it to. You know, we're not as profitable as we were when the sellers sold it, but only by a little bit. And I'm okay with that because I'm reinvesting in the business. I'm reinvesting in the people. You know, we're paying people more. There have been some economic changes too. Again, labor's been tough. Food costs went way up during COVID. It has come back down, but ultimately it's going really well. And you know, again, in terms of that profitability, the way I think about it is the first, we'll say 5 or 7 years, it's reinvesting in the business, it's paying down debt, it's getting rid of debt. It's, you know, I'm not looking to make a ton of money in those first 5 to 7 years. Once we get past that, then I'm going to start thinking about like, okay, now we start kind of leaning things out, getting it on a more stable path. We just, you know, we did a big kitchen renovation. As I mentioned, we took over the space next door and we invested money to build out the bakery there. So it's been a lot of reinvestment, again, a lot of paying down debt and not taking a ton out of the business. You know, we take a salary and we take distributions, but we're putting a lot more back into the business than the sellers were. And then I don't know what my timeline is. I don't, you know, I think I don't have any thoughts of selling the business anytime soon, but I think, you know, eventually I'll get to the point where I'm going to start to make the business look good again and on paper and, you know, not reinvest as much if I don't have to and be a little tighter on payroll and stuff like that and make the business look good. But yeah, it's been going great. You know, I love living here. It's an awesome place to live. There's tons of outdoor stuff, great schools, really good hospital system. I won. I feel like I am so fortunate and it worked out really well. And yeah, I'm in a pretty good spot.
That's amazing, Jarrett. And how old are you?
I am 42.
42. So summer 2018, we're approaching summer 2024. So we're 6 years into a 10-year SBA note. So you're in the back half. That's when a lot of, you know, I mean, you're really generating a lot of equity for yourself every month.
Yeah.
And you paid off the seller note quickly. Yeah. Cause we did take a bunch out of that escrow. As it turned out, just the way that payroll fell, cause it was like towards the end of a pay period and inventory was a little less than they thought. And, so actually that note, like a huge chunk of that note got taken away as soon as we figured out some of those net working capital calculations. And then there were some repairs and things that we took out of that. So that note shrunk a lot. And,
And yeah,
right. But and sorry, that note was there at transaction. So this was not you brought that cash to the table and it was sitting in escrow. It wasn't
no
financing.
No. Oh, it was
financing, and you were reducing what you had to pay them in financing.
Exactly.
Sorry.
Yep.
And Jarrett, let me ask, because you mentioned, being at Tuck, prestigious business school, Goldman Sachs and McKinsey come recruit there. Surely some of your classmates went that path. Can I ask on your personal take home what that looks like compared to if you'd gone into industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think cash, right? Like, and cash is certainly less. Like, I look at what my friends are making, and they're definitely making more money than me. But when it comes to equity, I think I'm doing a lot better because, I'm building up the value of this business, or paying down what the bank owed me. Same with the real estate. The value of the real estate just keeps going up as it's more and more scarce, and I'm making the business more profitable. Again, as a percentage of revenue, even though our take home number is about the same as the sellers, or a little less. So yeah, I think strictly on a cash basis, certainly less than what my classmates are taking home. But from an equity standpoint, I think I'm probably in a better spot. But to be honest, Will, like that's not why I did it.
Sure.
The money's fine. But that's not the driver.
Well, what about from a quality of life standpoint? That's what I should be asking.
Honestly, way better. Right. Are there times, like I told you this morning, we had a snowstorm, bunch of people called out, like I was up there doing dishes, that's just how it goes sometimes. But that's rare, that does not happen a lot. And certainly there are times when it's a Sunday morning and something happens and I got to wake up and come in and do dishes or whatever. And that's fine. That's part of being a small business owner. But the reality is that, we close at 3, which is great, right? I'm always around for my kids. I go to their sporting events. I'm really active in the community. I'm on the planning board. I'm I do a lot of stuff with the town. I volunteer. I have hobbies. I fly Cessnas and, little airplanes and do a little bit of instructing too. So, I think it's working out really well. And, again, that the thing that I have that I was afraid that I wouldn't have is that autonomy, that mastery, and that sense of purpose. And those are the things that are really important to me. And sure, the money is good and I'm living very, a comfortable life, certainly. Nowhere, not near what some of my other classmates are making, who went into private equity or whatever, but that's not the driver for me.
Yeah.
And those that wouldn't make me happy.
Yep. And the business has grown, even though growth wasn't something that you were going to pursue aggressively. Yeah. In fact, it's grown by what percentage would you say?
In the 6 years, we're up probably 60%. So I don't know what that is, compound annual growth rate, but we had some big years of big inflation. We had some headwinds as the result of COVID. Outdoor dining wasn't a thing, and we gained 11 extra tables. We only have 16 tables inside, so we gained 11. Massive increase. This is why we did this big kitchen renovation, because I wanted to increase our ability to serve all those tables. We used to be really limited in capacity because the kitchen just wasn't big enough. We didn't have enough cook space, flat, grill space and whatever. So we increased that. The business has definitely grown. And some of that is from me, but a lot of that is just, COVID and kind of other things that have happened.
The extra tables. It sounds like a lot of that is, so I guess in restaurants, all these tables on the curbside tables post-COVID is really a boon to restaurants. I mean, that's just because that's the one thing where there's a ceiling is the number of tables you have. There's a tight ceiling on a restaurant. It's basically number of tables times whatever number of meals per day.
Right.
And that's it. Number of table turns, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so the only thing that you can really change there is the number of tables, which post-COVID, a lot of restaurants were able to increase.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in terms of guest count, we were pretty limited. We were limited to about 500 a day, 500 guests. And then that doesn't include the bakery and takeout and catering and stuff like that, but just sit down guests. We were, if we hit 500, that was a great day. And now we're doing, we'll do 650, 660 pretty easy. And that was in the old kitchen. With the new kitchen, I'm hoping to hit 700 here pretty soon. So yeah, I mean, good outcome. Of course, during COVID, that was like our only income. So we were significantly less than what we were able to do. But then once things open back up, and people love it, it sucks. It takes up some parking spaces, but the town is just so much more vibrant.
Totally.
And, you walk around, there's people sitting there. It's awesome.
Totally. I love it. I mean, as a citizen of a town with outdoor seating, it just gives it much more of that continental flavor, right?
Yeah.
Going again on this point about growth and the fact that you had a general manager in place, one of the reasons that we like having operators or general managers in place as business buyers is so that we can then work on the business, not in the business. And usually working on the business means, sure, improving the business, but beyond that, strategic projects, i.e. growth.
Yep.
And if you weren't super growth focused, what the heck are you doing? No, no, but actually, seriously, Jarrett, like if you have a manager and you're not like, how am I going to open location 2 and 3? What does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah. So one of the things we did early on was my office manager, found another job. She gave us plenty of notice and said, "Hey, I just want to go do something else." I'm like, "Great." And we didn't hire somebody to take her place. I automated all that and I took over a lot of it. So I do the books. I'm the HR manager. I do a lot of that kind of back office stuff. And, one, I like doing it. I like looking at the numbers and kind of doing QuickBooks and stuff like that. It's just soothing, I guess. But also it's nice to not have somebody else that's dealing with your money in a small business. There's so many stories of people, stealing from, the bookkeeper stealing. And so I like that. So we've kind of reduced some payroll there. COVID took a big chunk of my, my growth and, the energy that I had for that, right, is like just figuring out how to keep things going. And, as I mentioned, we were able to do a lot of different things. Some of those things stuck. A lot of them we did during COVID and then we stopped doing. At this point now, the things I'm focusing on. So as I mentioned, we moved the bakery. So that was kind of big. That's expanding capacity. We renovated the kitchen this year. That was like, we actually did it in 6 weeks, but it was months and months of prep and planning and all that. So that was kind of, this past 6-8 months was really heavily focused on that. I did a lot of the work myself, just, being kind of the general contractor and chipping in and being here every day, literally with a hammer and helping the contractors do their stuff. At this point, I'm looking at a couple things. So as I mentioned, we're looking at bringing in mimosas and things like that. So raising the check average, just another kind of benefit for customers. We had a competitor move in across the street that's more fast casual. They do like bagels and, quick service type of stuff. So we're trying to move the business higher in the experience level. So instead of focusing on that quick stuff, they have taken some of those customers. We felt it a little bit. It hasn't had too much of an impact, but our strategy is to make the experience a little bit nicer. Catering is, again, it's something that we've always tried to grow and it's constantly up and down. We'll grow it. I'll bring somebody in. We had a couple great employees that did a good job and then, they left and things kind of fell off and then hired somebody new and it took them a little while to pull back up. So there's some opportunities there. And then lastly, I think we have a great brand that a lot of people know, especially Dartmouth people. And we have some great products. And so I'm looking at ways to expand outside of the store. So potentially in retail.
Yeah.
Potentially in e-commerce, selling mixes and stuff like that.
So
those are the things I'm going to be focused on this year.
That could be a really interesting business. It reminds me going back to I'm gonna riff here, and I may not know I don't know what I'm talking about. But it reminds me of when you were talking about like expanding locations and how perilous that can be for a restaurant. And I was just thinking, like, also there's something as a consumer, selfishly now as a diner, there's something special about there being but a single location for a place. Like it's like going to the one and only. It's that much more of an experience if there's just the one place where I can go have this meal. I went to Lou's, not Lou's 2 or Lou's 3 or Lou's 4 or Lou's 5. I went to the one and only Lou's. And I feel like if you leverage that brand into, like you said, mixes or something, that brand value is tighter, stronger, more special if there still is just a single location on Main Street in small Hanover, New Hampshire.
Yeah, absolutely. And back to your original question, Will, is like, what do I do every day? There's something fun and like really natural and human about hosting people and like serving people. And I enjoy that a lot. And I spend time doing that, right? I spend a lot of time in the dining room talking to people and being present. And, I remember somebody, an officer that I served under, talking about leadership by walking around. And, that like struck a chord to me. It's like, just be present, like talk to people, walk around, ask people how they're doing. It's so important and it's so fun. It really is a pleasure that I have in this business of like standing at the counter and talking to people and serving people and asking people how their meal was and figuring out ways that we can constantly be improving. So I enjoy that, and that brings me a lot of fulfillment.
Well, you took my last question out of my mouth, Jarrett. Is that you also bought what you characterized as a fun business? Yeah. Sweaty, boring businesses are great in many ways, and people can have fun in them. But there is definitely a certain sex appeal, if you will, to having your own restaurant, being in a restaurant environment. Your customers are basically there to have a good time and enjoy each other and enjoy a good meal. And you're giving them that experience and being kind of along for their ride or talking to them as they check out. You also said that you like shooting the shit with the staff. Yeah. Say a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, restaurant staff are they are a fun group of people. There's definitely some partying and some stories, and we've got our fair share of people who've had trouble in the past. I don't shy away from that. I'm okay with it. Sometimes it bites me, but most of the time not. If you treat people well and treat them with respect, even if they've had a troubled history, they're gonna be grateful for it, and they're gonna appreciate you, and I appreciate them, for coming in and giving it their all. And those hard days when I need them to show up, or I need a little extra out of them, or I need them to put in some overtime, it all comes around. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting crew, a lot like Marines, to be honest, especially in the back of the house, especially in the kitchen. Lots of
DUI. How is that? How are Marines?
Just, oh man. I mean, young Marines just do stupid stuff, get in trouble and, you see a Lance Corporal, young Marine, pull into the parking lot with this couple-year-old Mustang. You're like, dude, how'd you afford that? Like, I know how much money you made. Oh, they gave me a great loan. Like, can I look at the loan? Like, oh yeah. It's like 19% interest and whatever. You're like, dude, do you know how much you're actually paying for this? So there's some of that. But again, they're great people. And I think people who work in this industry, it's a certain group of people, a special group of people who enjoy cooking and they enjoy serving people and they enjoy being part of that atmosphere. And the atmosphere in the kitchen is fun, and it's, everyone's always joking around and having a good time. You have to if you're gonna survive it. So yeah.
Did you watch The Bear?
Yeah, I loved it.
How close to your day to day is that show?
Obviously dramatized, but they didn't make that stuff up. We've been in those, like the episode where the tickets are coming in from Grubhub. I'm like, I have been there, like not from Grubhub, Snack Pass and online ordering, and like, holy, dining room is full. There's people hanging out the door and all these orders are coming in and like everyone's freaking out, or, things break all the time, and figuring out how you're going to make it through the day. It's like, they got a lot of stuff right in there. Again, it's a little dramatic at times, but pretty accurate. and maybe my history as a pilot and, having served in combat and, lends well to being able to handle stress. And I kind of need some of that in order to make it through the day.
Well, it's funny, Jarrett, you say that, because I've had more than one guest, veteran, say, I've been shot at, I've seen combat, and running this business that I bought is still the hardest thing I've ever done. It sounds like maybe in your case, it's not. You've probably had some deeper crises on the battlefield, but
it's a different type of stress, like a lot of times people talk about flying. It's like 99% boring and routine, and that 1% of like sheer terror. You don't experience that as much here. Like I feel like the stress is more of a slow burn. The college goes home, and before Thanksgiving, the students, they do the quarter system. So all of December, there's no students here. And then January, February, March is like dreary and slow. And, our business is way down. And then we have tax season in April, and it's like a scary couple months. And even having done this for 6 years, it's like every year, January, February, I'm like, waking up in the middle of the night, like, are we going to have enough money? And those are stresses. Those are different types of stresses, but yeah, it's tough. And I mean, some of that planning, the scariest part about it is that like, this is all on me. And I know I'm not super smart and super experienced or anything like that. And like, I could really screw this up bad. And that's a little terrifying. Fortunately, I haven't yet, too bad, but it can happen.
What a great story. What a neat business. If people want to reach out with questions, how do you like them to do that?
Sure. So I'm on LinkedIn. I did join Search Funder, but I'm not super active there. So LinkedIn, Jarett Berke, JarettBerke. If you want to email me, you can email me, Jarett, Jarett @loserestaurant.com. Reach out. Happy to talk.
Okay. Put that all in the show notes.
Cool.
Jarett Berke, thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. Great talking to you.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week, so tons of new interviews and stories to come, stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.